What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and it's a couple days prior to the launch of these two lovely books right here. But I have the pleasure of being able to talk to one of the co-leads, and there's a whole bunch of stuff we're going to talk about of Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, Ajit George. So, welcome to the channel.
Hi, Ted. It's great to be here. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
So I think, we talked a little bit beforehand. There's obviously a ton that we can talk about the book. Your life story is a whole interesting thing too that I think people would find interesting, but maybe that's outside of the scope of this particular interview. But why don't we talk a little bit about your history with Dungeons and Dragons first, so people know where your background is, and that you're not just somebody that was plucked out of like, oh, this guy could write a book,
Sure.
I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Um, Old school. I mean, like, basic red box old school. My mom brought it home one day when I was in first grade, and I was like, what is this weird and awesome thing? And I was mesmerized and just kind of like fell right into it. But also was struggling to find other people to play with. So I didn't play a lot in my younger years. And then in high school, I got really into it. There was a bunch of I went to an all boys Catholic school, and it feels like an 80s. I'm an 80s kid, so it feels like an 80s stereotype where like you could watch Stranger Things and be like, okay, that's kind of me, except like it's all boys. The jocks are kind of picking on the nerds and the weirdos, and like I was one of the weird nerds and weirdos, and we all kind of grouped together and played a ton of D&D, like almost every day for 4 years.
Wow.
And it was a powerful experience. Like it was transformative. It was an escape for me. It was a place for me to find who I was and to explore myself, and I really loved it. I loved the game. Played it on and off after that for years in college and onwards. And about 10 years ago, I started just talking about my own thoughts and writing for games, and started getting invited to writing first for indie games. And then finally, after doing a bunch of games for, working on a bunch of indie games, including for Bully Pulpit, Burning Wheel, and then eventually Want to Cook games, I got invited on Ravenloft. And that was my first gig for D&D. And then, while working on Ravenloft, I fell in love with working on Calicari. It was really personal to me. I was the first Indian writing Indian inspired material for D&D, and I was like, oh man, I got so many more ideas in my head. I want to do more.
Sure.
And I thought it would kind of be cool to get a bunch of other people of color, people like myself who just never gotten a chance to write for D&D or see their cultures in D&D, to put together a book around it. And pandemic hit, and I had a ton of time. My full-time job usually has me traveling all over the world, but I had a ton of time, and I had a meeting with Jeremy Crawford and Wes Snyder, my co-lead, and I pitched them on the idea of the book, and I was blown away. They said yes.
Sure.
They loved it. They loved the idea, and they also really knew my full-time work. I think that was the key thing. Is like I manage teams internationally. I have a lot of like things that I have to be responsible for and to be on time for. And so they knew. I think they knew that I could handle it. So Wes and I paired up, and that's how things got started.
So let me ask you this: when you were playing, which I'm blown away by the concept of being able to play every day, which blows my mind because I didn't get
Yeah,
into
I mean
D.
that was high school,
Well,
right?
I didn't get into D&D till my senior year of high school. So this was 2003 ish,
Okay.
and we played on this like every Saturday, which was still awesome. And I wish I had
Mm-hmm.
gotten into it earlier because the lack of responsibilities that I had then versus what I
Yes.
have now is obviously a whole different scenario. Uh,
Yeah.
but were you mostly a player? Were you DMing? Did you guys swap? How did that go?
Yeah, it went back and forth. One of the coolest things was we had multiple games running, but the biggest one was a high school biology teacher. he saw
Really?
me reading a Dragonlance book, and he was like, "Hey," in his class of all things, and he was like, "I thought I was gonna get busted, like I was in trouble." He's like, "Hey, talk to me after class." I was like, "Cool, I'm in trouble." And he's like, "Hey, you like these books?" I'm like, "Yeah, where's this going? I like these books." Really, like really defensively. I was like, "Yeah, I like these books. What of it?" And he's like, "Cool, I do too." I was like, "Wait, what?" And he's like, "Yeah, I play D&D or run D&D. Do you want to get a group together?" And I was like, "What in the world is going on here?" My head exploded.
That's awesome.
But he had run it in his college days, and he had created this whole world, and he had this huge notebook full of notes. And then he ran a bunch of us in his class in a D&D game for like 4 years. And then of course he couldn't do it every day,
Sure.
right? So he's got his thing to do after school, but we started all playing ourselves, mostly D&D, but a bunch of other role-playing games during that time. It was amazing. It was like the most creative and fertile period of my life. I loved it. We're kids, right? You got that time.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't have the responsibilities of an adulthood.
Oh my God, I know. I wish I had thought about like, oh, we could have just played after school. Like, why did
Yeah,
we wait till the weekend and only
yeah,
carve out a couple of hours? We could have been doing this every
yeah,
day. Especially once everybody could drive. Forget it. We could have just drove to each other's house. It's crazy.
yeah,
So for people who are unaware of the work you did on Ravenloft, why don't we? I mean, we kind of hinted at it, but
yeah,
so folks who don't know, so we're talking about Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, obviously
yeah. Van
novel as
Richten's
a
Guide to
show. So
Ravenloft.
what was your influ? You wrote basically one of the domains. Is that
Yeah, I wrote two pieces. I wrote the domain of Calicari and the mini domain of Neuronjon. Excuse me.
mm-hmm.
Calicari was inspired. Both of them were inspired by India.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I actually spent 4 months of the year in India, travel back and forth for my full-time job, which is tricky, but also gives me like a really grounded view in India, and has for many years, and grown up around in India back and forth. So I, I took it from parts of South India where my family's from, the state of Kerala, and then I took it from historical figures as well. And I wanted to do, you know, I think it's you see people who've never been to India see India through like the lens of maybe Temple of Doom, and you're like, okay,
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
India's like, and you're just like, oh, let me try to avoid those kind of
Sure,
stereotypes.
sure, yeah.
So rather than go super horror, because I was a little worried about like if I went super horror that would start to come into play,
Mm-hmm.
is that I want more dark fantasy with it, and kind of try to subvert some tropes with it. And I really love doing Calicari, and then the mini domain of Neuron John's definitely darker, right? You've got this bronze dragon who's like eating souls and
Yeah,
luring
yeah.
people to their doom. But Calicari is a little bit more complicated as a political horror in many ways, right? It's a dark fantasy and a political horror, and I think political horror or societal horrors are not as like investigated as often. So I had a lot of fun with that too.
So you had writing a piece of a larger, almost an anthology, kind of in and of itself.
Yeah,
I do feel like Ravenloft fit into a weird slot in
it
the D
did.
and D mythos. Didn't really know
Yeah,
what it wanted to be. And then that led to obviously we talked about pitching Journey Through the Radiant Citadel. Now, again, something that was a shocker to me when I learned it in all the pre-roll stuff is that you are not affiliated, other than basically working on these things, with
sure.
Wizards of the Coast. You're not a WotC employee, because I don't remember seeing an announcement that you
Yeah,
work there or a senior game designer. And we talked again a little beforehand. This is unprecedented, with the
yeah,
exception. And we talked again, Keith Baker and Eberron, but that was a
sure.
specific like contest essentially.
Yeah,
And you pitched something, they liked it, and they let you co-lead a book when again you have another full-time job. This was just like a pet project for 2 years, 3 years of a whole book.
yeah.
So I mean, what does it feel like to, I mean, I don't know if this has opened doors for other folks to do something like this too, but uh I think, I mean, I personally also, I have my thoughts about the way things are handled with fifth edition and things of that nature, but I think bringing a fresh perspective from the outside
Sure.
in is a huge way to build the diversity, not only obviously the diversity of the cast, but just the way of
Right.
thinking, the way things are
Exactly.
structured, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was exactly part of it, is that like I've led my organization. Our nonprofit's been around for 25 years. I've been in a leadership role for 15. I've led international missions, some pretty intense work. some very intense work actually. And so they knew I could handle the stress and the pressures and manage the teams. I also went to Clearing West, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a science fiction fantasy writers workshop that trains you with some of the best science fiction and fantasy writers around the world writing at the time. It's a very intensive workshop for about 2 months. That was a point where I thought I was going to be a writer. And so I did that before. So I have had a background in writing, and I had written for a bunch of indie games. I just hadn't written for D&D itself. And so they knew I had the expertise, and they did have Wes as my co-lead, right? So Wes was there, and he was a great co-lead, a great partner through the whole process. And Ravenloft really influenced me. I think one of the great things that it did was the domains of dread were really interesting in terms of giving you a snapshot of the domains. I think the challenge was that you needed a story to go along with it, right? You wanted the thing okay, so here's Calicari, but what do I do with it? And Journeys to the Radiant Citadel was sort of an answer to that. Is like, hey, you're going to enter a new culture, but here's the story that takes you through the new culture. So you get kind of like, it's almost like being invited in by a local into their culture and getting a tour by a local into like how the food is and what are the exciting spots to go to, and what's the fun stuff and what's the food and how do you tell stories there. And that's what Journeys to the Radiant Citadel does. So I mean, I can tell you a lot about the process. It was tough as hell, Ted. Like these books are not easy, and there's 100 things that could go wrong at any point, and you're always looking for that that pure gold, to hit that pure gold and to make people happy with the work you're doing, and to bring joy with it.
And I will say, you were at least some of these, again, not naming names of specific books, but some of them had very quick turnaround times where I feel like there's yes, you can bring in guest writers to work on things. When you have a turnaround time of like 6 to 8 months, I'm assuming a lion's share of the work's going to be handled in-house, where they're going to be like, hey, thanks for this, but we have to make it fit the mold that we want it to fit, and then it has to get out the door. What was it, 2 years you had lead on this?
The whole book, it took from beginning to end, was 2 years. And the writers had so for Ravenloft, I'll give you some facts, right?
Sure,
my time on that was, I think our deadline, we had about two months to write each of our pieces, right? And we had the writers had about 10 months to write the pieces for Journeys to the Radiant Citadel. So 5 times the amount. And the other 2 years are like the pre-production, right? We're building out the vision documents. So there's a bunch of vision documents for like, hey, this is what this book about, and here's what it's not about, and here's how we're building this up. And then there's editorial and so on and so forth. But they had about 5 times the amount of time that I had in Ravenloft to write their work. And to go back and forth with in conversations, both in like Zoom calls and red lines and notes, so that it really was a conversation with each other and a conversation with the writers between themselves. And if you do a quick read, you're not going to catch it. But if you do like a deeper read and you continue to read it like 2-3 times, you're like, oh, these cultures are kind of linked. I didn't realize that, but here's these little subtle ties. And so there's an organic elements to the book, but it does take a deeper read to get there and understand that. And that the reason for that was really simple, is that it is an anthology. So like, if it's too tied with each other, then you're like, well, okay, I can't play this adventure without this other adventure, and I can't play the Radiant Citadel without this. So we're trying to do like 3 different things thoughtfully with the book.
So let me ask you, in comparison to, because I've seen from some of the stuff, and we've talked a little bit before, but when you wrote for Ravenloft, were you in contact with the other writers, or were you kind of in a silo doing your own thing?
Yeah, there's a setup, there's a platform for us to all talk with each other, but we really didn't. And I think Ravenloft, the process, and I love that book and I loved working on it. I know, there's critics around it, but I had a really great time with it, and I believe in the book. But I think one of the areas where, I wish we had done things differently is I wish we collaborated with each other more and had those conversations. And I think part of it is a product of lack of time.
Sure.
But I realized as a lead, one of my responsibilities was to create that conversation from get-go. So we had a kickoff meeting where all the writers were on together to talk to each other. We had so many forums set up for conversation. writers would do co-working sessions together, and they're just like, oh my god, I'm on deadline, I gotta get this done, write next draft. And people are always like, they're always just jamming and talking to each other, and I really kind of enforced and encouraged it constantly.
Yeah, so I wanted to. The only reason I wanted to bring up about Ravenloft is because of the seemingly stark contrast, not only again in the time for the writing, but also that yeah, it was peer reviewing. Hey, what do you think about this?
Yeah,
And I mean, if you have access to other people who are writing in the book you're going to be writing in, it only makes sense to encourage that collaborative process and to build those relationships and say, hey, I'm thinking about this, and oh, like maybe that could be like a cheeky callback, or like you said, like a tie
that's
kind of a
exactly it.
tie-in.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's great. I think that shows from what I've been able to read through so far that this obviously there's a lot of heart and soul poured into this book, and not that's not the case from the earliest anthologies that I've seen, even going back older editions, and even from what we've seen in 5e. Sometimes it's like there's a clear standout that's like, okay, this is the one you run, and then the other one's like, nah, but I don't feel like that when I read through, again, from what I've read through so far, that there's a place. The fact that the Radiant Citadel operates like a hub world of a video game definitely can be, and it doesn't. I guess this is something else we should highlight once again, that it doesn't take the place of other things that people may like if they love something like
Sure.
Planescape. Because
Yeah,
can we get it once more
yeah.
from you that this is not a replacement for Planescape?
No, it absolutely isn't. I mean, I love Sigil, and I respect it deeply, and I just respect the work of the people who've done it, worked on it before. I actually know some of them personally, and I'm friends with them. And um, I think the way to think about it is, I heard this quote somewhere that like all writers are in conversation with each other, and
Mm-hmm.
that we're always kind of like, it's kind of like jazz. We're riffing off of each other, and
Sure,
so um, to say that like I didn't think of Sigil at all when I was doing the Radiant Citadel, it would be a lie, right?
sure.
But instead what it was is I was like, I don't want to be a copy of Sigil. Like I love the influence of Sigil. I love what it means. I want to do something that's unique and creative and different, that can be maybe run side by side with Sigil. You could have these two cities in conversation with each other that operate very differently, but have obviously like extra world. Like they're both like, it's sort of like a conversation about how you know Beijing and LA are two very different cities, but people commute between those cities,
Right,
and there
sure.
is a vibrant trade and cultural exchange and all of those things. And I kind of see, I would love to see a campaign where Sigil and the Radiant Citadel both exist and are in conversation.
Yeah, because from just looking through it, I don't see any reason why a key couldn't take you to the
Yeah,
Radiant Citadel, or a crystal couldn't take you to Sigil. I don't see why any of that could. That all seems to make sense to me. And I mean, really, it's just adding to the D&D
or
mythos. We're not taking anything
exactly.
away. So I mean that makes. I mean, I'm excited for what the years to come will have for 5e, because we're going to start to see, I mean, with this book and other books, new content. As much fun as it is to see Ravenloft come back, Dragonlance later this year, Spelljammer in a month from now. That's great. But the problem I feel with a lot of that is people have built these things up in their head for years, right? It's what I call the Diablo 3
Yeah,
paradox, where you
yeah,
wait 15 years for something
yeah.
and it doesn't live up to what you had in your head. So the new content, I think, is personally some of the better stuff, because it's out of, you don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
just like it gets to be its own thing. And then maybe, 15 years from now, people are waiting for the next edition version of Radiant Citadel or whatever the new
Sure,
content is.
sure. Yeah, that's you hit it exactly how I feel, Ted, on this. Like, first of all, I'm an old school D&D player, and I have deep, deep love for the old content. I played the original Spelljammer, I played the original Planescape, all of that stuff. Um, and I think the challenge with that is that like you have a memory from your childhood
Right.
or a memory from like these great games you played about what that game should be, and then suddenly it's like, how does the reality ever live up to that? And that's really hard, right? And I think creating new content opens the world up to a bunch of new ideas that haven't been in D&D before. And in many ways, I think it'll maybe even add to the hobby, right? More people are like, oh, I don't need to know 30 years of lore, 40 years of lore to like jump into the game. This can be mine, right? I can do it right here, right now.
Yeah,
I
I
think
see
that's exciting.
people say the same thing about Forgotten Realms, right? For
Okay.
what it's worth, and I mean Ed Greenwood, ton of work there, but
Yeah.
there's 40 Drizzt novels alone. No, we're not even
Yeah.
talking about the other content and all the other books.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so much there, and that can be very intimidating for somebody to be like, I don't know, especially if you know you're gonna play with somebody who's like, oh my god, I used to love Spelljammer, it was my favorite thing, and you're like, well, I'm already in the hole on this because you know more than I do if I were to run it for you.
Exactly.
But if I can pick up something brand new, I can be the person who introduces you to this new world, and then I can give my spin on it, or just read through and take it right directly from it with no alterations. But I'm setting the expectation, and that I think is something that I do feel is lost because people will say that, whether it's something that they think is replacing something else or a new version of, whether they liked Eberron Rising from the Last War or they liked Ravenloft. The new stuff is what I'm most excited about, and I think that, again, a lot of that is showcased in here, and the fact that this is designed in such a way that it's very easy to adapt, because you have all the different stories written in here showing off all the different worlds.
Yeah.
It's very easy for you as a homebrewer, content, a campaign, a DM, whatever, to home world builder, to say, well, let's add a couple other locations that I'll make up,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
then, like, oh, okay, here's how I write my story, and the hub world's already in the works, done for me. If they want to go other places, I can do that. Or you have a really cool idea for a world, and then all of a sudden it starts to peter out, and you're like, I'd like to expand this and make it a little bit bigger. Oh, well, here you go, just do that.
Exactly. No, that's exactly it. That's the way I think about it too. And I want people to own it and to like make the Radiant Citadel theirs and tell the stories they want out of it. Riff off the stories there, expand them. There's at the end of each adventure, there's a gazetteer, so you can play more in the different worlds that are outlined there. And there's just adventure seeds. And now that you run an adventure, you even have the rhythm of like how my adventure might go there. So there's a lot of possibilities. And I want to throw back to something you said a little earlier, which is to say, you know, nobody was phoning it in on this book. Like
Right.
the writers were like, "Oh my god, this is the most important." I mean, the writers were like so deeply emotional about the work that they put in. It was like at times, like they're like, "This is my sister that I'm writing into this. This is my abuela that I'm putting into this. This
Sure, yeah.
is my favorite dish that I ate back in Mexico." They spoke to like what meant something to them, and they knew they had a huge responsibility to do right by this book. For all of the fans out there who would look to them and be like, "You got a shot. Like, did you take that shot? Did you do
Yeah.
it right?" It meant a lot to like they're all part of the D&D community. They want to live up to like the honor and respect they've been given by having this shot on it. So they were very passionate, really hardworking on this book. We all were. It was very very stressful process at times. I was like, at times I was pulling out my hair, going like, "Why did I sign up for this? This is going to drive me to a grave." But I loved it, and so did all the writers. It was a really powerful moment for all of us.
So how did you how involved, or were you fully involved in the process of choosing the different writers for the book?
100%. Yeah, they let me choose all the
Oh
writers.
wow.
Yeah, I got they treated me. One of the great things about the D&D design studio, and I love that studio, and I love the people and respect the people there. They work very hard under tight deadlines, and they put their heart into it. But they treated me genuinely as a co-lead. I would run by every name by Wes Snyder, who
Mhm.
is my co-lead, and be like, "Hey, do you agree with this choice?" And he's like, almost 100% of the time, he's like, "You know better than I with this, to like the choices and the writers. I'm going to go with your call. Let's like mutually look at their writing and decide if it works and how there's the processes are." But I did all the interviews for it, and they let me have her 100% from beginning to end, from conception, from the pitch docs, the vision, all of that, the vision documents that like kind of led the book,
Mhm.
to being in the WotC offices. And I don't know if you know this, Ted, but like every book goes through goes through, so I mean, this book at least, so I can't speak for every book, right? I can just speak for
Sure.
my book
Yeah,
at
yeah, yeah.
least. But we went through so many editorial processes and like so many reviews and the editors, and there'll still be editorial mistakes, because like you can look at a piece of work 100 times and you'll still miss something. But went through so many editorial reviews, And then in person, we printed out the whole book, and Jeremy Crawford, Chris Perkins, Wes Snyder, myself, Judy Bauer, who's the senior editor, all were in the WotC offices together. And we just were like, by physical copy, like looking by line and reading it through and reviewing it. And we did that twice.
Wow. That's
And
really impressive.
it is. They take, I would, Jeremy and Chris, who are the game architects, love this game and they care about it deeply. And so they will take that. They will do that for every book. They will be there, whoever the lead is. They will do that for every book. But that's what we did on this, and it was like just a great team of us all jamming and talking about it for a week. And like, Jeremy would be like, "Oh, what about this, and this?" And I'd be like, "Okay, here's my thoughts on that." And so we would change some stuff, and he would give some notes, and Chris would give great notes, and Judy's an amazing editor, and she would catch things. And it was a tough process, a very vigorous process, but
Sure.
A thoughtful one.
Well, no, that's very interesting because we don't. And I wish this is something that I would love for WotC to give us a little more, even if it's like a silly The Office style, like follow the camera tour through the studio. But that's very interesting because we don't know too much about the process other than from folks who get to work on it. And even then, unless they're obviously like potentially co-leading a book, if they're writing a piece of it, they're again just a cog in the wheel. They don't get to see the greater picture. So that's very interesting to know that much effort. I mean, I assume a lot of effort was put in, but to know that it was on top of collaborations and documents, it's physically sitting there and redlining things line by line.
Yeah.
And I know what that's like for my job, having to do that with the people in charge of whether the thing does well or fail. So that's very interesting to hear. And it can be nerve-wracking, but it's usually a really good process.
It is. It's exactly that. It's completely nerve-wracking. You're like, do you guys like my baby? Like, right. Do you think my baby's ugly? Like, so you're kind of like sitting there just being like, I mean, I'm doing the red lines, but I'm also looking at everybody else going like, oh my god, what do they think? But at the end of the day, the book becomes better. Sure. Book becomes better because we do that process, and you take the criticism and you take the reviews, and you're just like, okay, you're right. Let me think this through, and then you're like. There's a point where like I wanted something, and Jeremy had given some red lines and he wanted some things cut, and then I was like, I saw them and I was like, hey Jeremy, can we talk about that? So Jeremy, Wes, and I sat it down, and I explained to him how I felt about it and why I wanted to keep it, and he's like, Ajit, you're the co-lead. I'm not going to overrule you on this book unless it's a rules decision. Like, he's the mechanics person, right? So he makes ultimate choices in mechanics. And it wasn't a mechanics thing. And he's like, I will go with what you say. And I was like blown away because like he's the game architect, right? It's his studio basically. And he's like, but let's if you want to keep it, like maybe you could do this and this. And he gave actually really, really smart advice about how to make that better than what it was originally. So really appreciated it.
Sure. So let's talk about your, because obviously we know you hired a team of writers who wrote most of the individual encounters. So what was your writing contribution? And I know this, but let's for everybody else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my main, the only thing that was actually fully written by me is the Radiant Citadel itself. Mm-hmm. I gave hundreds of notes and red lines and edits to every piece in the book, and small rewrites here and there. But the Radiant Citadel itself, the hub location, was conceived of, created, and written by me.
And if I recall, you waited until all the stories were in before, which I think is, again, maybe that's not something that other people have the luxury to do, but waiting till the other stories and hub kind of worlds or sub worlds, if you will, were written, to then use that to inform the way the Citadel works as the major hub, I think makes the most sense to me. But and that's how you did it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I wanted to kind of like soak in the DNA of all the other pieces, because I put small little bits of it here and there, and they're in like the food, right? The food's influenced by this, or the criminal punishment is influenced by this, and small things here and there are influenced by it. But I really wanted to soak in all the other pieces, because those cultures inform the Radiant Citadel, not the vice versa. I didn't want to be like, well, here's the hub world, and you guys have to like kind of make it to my way. those civilizations existed before the Radiant Citadel was rediscovered. So it would make sense for it to be built afterwards, or at least, populated afterwards, and to be written afterwards, allowed me to kind of like look at what they were doing first. And the book is a book of anthology, so it really centers around their stuff. And the hub world is really, its purpose is to be a unifying place that if you really do want to go from beginning adventure to the end of the adventure, we give in each adventure a section of how that ties to the Radiant Citadel, so you can have an ongoing story. And we treat our audience like adults, that like here's the base level, but you are going to riff off and build off of it more. We don't want to take away your creative process and be like, oh, here's the only way you can do this thing. This is the one way. We give enough information to kind of sew those seeds together, those stories together. But also, we also know everybody has got their home worlds that they love, and you may be going to pull and pluck, your favorite pieces, and maybe you'll put the Radiant Citadel in the ethereal plane, and have it be there, but you don't need to use everything.
Right, and if you did, and this is just something again to highlight for folks who are unaware, if you wanted to, you could run from the first adventure. Level wise, it will allow you to go 1 to 14, basically, if you ran them in the order they're printed in the book.
Yeah, 100%. And then you'll see a recurring theme. So all of it's kind of like, there's always like the magic behind the scenes, and you're like, who's ever going to see and understand what you were doing? But like, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
And I'll give you an example about what I was thinking, in that, in the review process, when we're in the D&D studio, I forgot to mention that art team's there too. And so we're looking at all the art pieces as well. And so like, there was a little color correction on the Soul Shaker, to make sure the colors of the arms look a little bit different, not all the same black, right? Slightly different shades of black. Who's going to notice that? Myself, a few others.
Sure.
But it was important because they're like, hey, the Soul Shaker is made of different creatures, now, different human beings all sewn together, not one. Similarly, there are actually different beats between the adventures, and I think there are callback beats. And that allows us, if you play it from beginning to end, you might feel that rhythm, but it's a really subtle one. It's something that like myself and Wes and my wife, who was the narrative design consultant, Whitney Strix-Balton, we talked about, and we knew what kind of beats we wanted to see from beginning to end. But those are all really subtle, like little pieces of magic that, like, until you play it from beginning to end, you'll be like, oh wait, that's a kind of a callback to that. And, oh, that theme kind of reminds me of that theme. And that's our effort, to kind of have that coherent story, if possible, from beginning to
end. So I don't obviously want to dive too much into spoilers, but and I don't want to have you be like, oh, pick your favorite adventure, because I realize that's kind of that's unfair to everybody
totally
involved. But
it's unfair.
How about this? What was when you read through and were reading through what everybody wrote, what was the one piece that kind of like, or whatever you want to give away, that like either caught you off guard, like stood out, blew your mind? Like, was there one thing more so than others that you're like, oh man, I can't wait to see what people think about this?
Yeah, that's a good one. There's been a lot of talk about various adventures have gotten a little bit more, interviews or press.
Sure, yeah.
So maybe I'll talk about one that really, just pull it up, make sure I've got this is correct here. Yeah, the one that really surprised me a little bit was between Tangled Roots. It's a little bit of a slow burn, and then it gets really intense. Okay. And without giving away the climax of it, there is a villain that you can play straight off, and you can kill that villain, and that'll be fine, right? You solve the adventure, and the big bad at the end of it is dead. But then when you realize what is going on with the big bad and why it's doing what it's doing, it kind of hit me at my core. I was like, oh, this is actually a tragedy. This isn't a horror. This is kind of a tragedy, and it's really sad. And I hope players play and find out what is really going on and what's causing the big bad to do what it's doing, and that they can kind of come up to an alternate ending. And what is kind of cool about a lot of these adventures are there are multiple alternate endings or forked paths that you can take. Some of them genuinely very different outcomes that will have repercussions for the region afterwards if you take this choice instead of this choice. And I think Between Tangled Roots also has that, like, if you kill the big bad straight out in the way you can, that will have a repercussion for the area that is not as good as if you solve it in a different way. And the best way analogy is, do you ever play Planescape Torment, the video game?
A long time ago, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember like there's so many multiple endings there, and there's like there's one where you can just you kill out straight out, just big bad fight, great. But there's another couple different ways you can do that, and that ending you still have you still end up in hell, but like it's kind of a little like your friends survive, right? It's kind of like, oh, your friends are you resurrect your friends and they survive even if you have a doomed ending. And I think of Between Tangled Roots as one of those like, oh yeah, I really hope that they come out with another ending. It really meant a lot to me. It was really powerful.
All right, well, be on the lookout for that one specifically.
Yeah.
If you're gonna run any, it sounds like that might be the one to check out if you're only gonna run one. But I'm gonna have to read through that one a little bit closer. So I know we talked a little bit about how obviously the stat blocks and things from monsters and whatnot. So if people are looking to either say that one thing's way overpowered or way weak, it's not you. So we'll get that out of the way up front. So don't you got to go after, I guess, Chris Perkins or Crawford on that one or their team. So don't make sure you're directing your thoughts one way or the other. But out of all the stat blocks that are contained in here, which one is your favorite? Did you have a monster, or maybe it's the artwork of the monster, not necessarily the mechanics?
Yeah. Well, my favorite monster, and let's step like aside from it. It's just sort of the favorite creature in this thing is the Drought Elder.
Okay.
And I don't know if you want me to spoil a little bit with that or not. It is it's a creature from the last adventure.
Okay, I was slipping through myself, so
it's less like a stat block and more like an entity in the far realm.
I can see that.
Yeah, and I think I was like, whoa. I mean, I guess I'll give it away if you feel okay with that.
Spoiler alert, folks. Click away if you don't want to know. This is your 3, 2, 1. Go ahead.
Right. And so like it's like a dead god that is its consciousness is sort of there, but not really. And you are exploring its body. Like its body is the dungeon, and you get this vague and creepy sense that it knows you're there, but maybe doesn't care. It's sort of like, I think of a dead god thinking of like ants that might be crawling upon it, and you're like, oh shit, is this thing like alive? Is it dead? Does it know that I exist? Does it give a shit that I exist? It's pretty creepy and pretty awesome, and I really hope the Drought Elder makes an appearance in future D&D products, and that they really build it out a lot more. But what is in there it's a pretty unique idea for a creature, and I really love it.
I'm looking at so I saw it actually caught my eye when I was flipping through on my casual flip through, because the map kind of gives you an idea of what you're looking at. Yeah. And then as we've been talking, I've been looking at the bolded text for the different monsters, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. There's some. I mean, those things are like infesting this desiccated body of a godlike creature that floats and drifts in the far realm, and you're like, what is going on here? It is wild and awesome. And just the shit that happens inside of the Drought Elder's, decaying body is kind of nuts. And it's just a really awesome thing. It is, yeah. As monster kind of things go in this, as creature kind of things go in the book, it's probably my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, again, just looking, I'm not going to spoil anything, but just looking at first, I was going to be like, well, you better bring a paladin. And then I'm like, well, actually, there's a unique variation that would actually matter. So, you're gonna have a hard time. I'm gonna tell you that much. it's not a cakewalk. That is for damn sure. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, that's, I'm gonna have to read through that adventure a little bit more, because
it's a great adventure.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. We'll take a break from the Radiant Citadel for a moment and kind of go to a little bit of a lighter note. We talked about how you played D&D all the time and played a bunch of different games. What's like that standout core memory of like your quintessential Dungeons and Dragons experience? Whether it was just like a goofy shopkeeper that the DM made up, or like that
Yeah.
epic moment that you had. Is there one thing that like sticks in your mind as like the moment that you like to remember?
Yeah, I mean, and like remember Ted, like I was a teenage boy, so
Yeah, 100%.
para fantasies and all of that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I played. First of all, I think this is first second edition, and we're playing. Yeah, we were playing first edition, I think. Then we switched to second, I believe, throughout the campaign. But at the time, there was all these racial restrictions, so you couldn't play an Elven Paladin. But our DM was like, "Okay, you're one of like these 12 Elven Paladins that your god has chosen, and you're cool, and you can do this thing." I was like, "Awesome, right?" And I'm
Yeah,
playing and
yeah.
playing, and at one point, like it's like senior year. So we've been playing for 4 years, early for 4 years, and climactic moment where we're fighting a demigod that is like my god's like arch nemesis, not Lawleth or anything like that. Just this is all his homebrew world.
Mm-hmm.
Killing him, and you find out that he's got this like powerful, like these kind of like artifacts that like made him a demigod, and one of them was this powerful sword, and it's all terribly evil. So we bury it and we hide it and so on and so forth. And great. Like so the demigod's been banished. And we go on from there on other adventures. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but my god like kind of denied me something, or was like kind of like not doing what I wanted. And I was like, great, I'm gonna get vengeance. So I go back. The party does not know this. I go back and sneak off and dig up like these artifacts and take them and become a demigod. I become this evil demigod. I'm a teenage kid who's just like
Sure,
trying
yeah,
to,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And I'm just like, I'm a demigod. I'm like so powerful, and secretly convince my other players. And this is really kind of cool how my DM like really let me get away with like all sorts of nonsense. I would send him some notes and like, oh, my friends start hearing whispers from a new god in their ear telling them to convert, and so like they all convert to worshiping me.
Ah, nice, very nice.
And then I think when they found out, they all beat me up. They're like, you're such a jerk. I was like, totally fair. You guys should kick my ass now. Yes.
Awesome.
So it was a lot of fun.
Those are always the best moments when all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, it was the end of the senior year. It was like completely off the rails at that point. It was just a fun way to go out.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we talked a lot about the book. It'll be out. God, was it 2 days from now? It's the 18th of, or is it the 19th?
Tuesday the 19th.
Tuesday the 19th. All right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Books usually released on a Tuesday, so you have access to this the standard edition cover. If you have access to a local game store, you can get the shiny, prismatic, crystalline.
I think the Radiant Citadel actually like glows a little bit from the light. Yeah. There you go. You got it glowing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it'll be available wherever you would normally get your books. I have to contact my local game store to get my extra copies. We'll do a giveaway. And yeah, I guess the last thing I'll ask you is, out of what you've seen, you've worked on stuff, and what you've seen in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons so far, and maybe you have peeks behind the curtains, and I'm not trying to grab for secret details, but what's one thing that you would like to see come to the game that either there's a gap, there's a hole, or something that needs to be restructured? What do you think is the thing, as someone who's worked on the game, that could really help jettison it to that next level? What's the thing that it's missing?
I mean, it's wild because everybody makes this comparison to Sigil, but I would love to see Sigil. I would love to see Sigil. And I think so the first one would be Sigil, and the second one would be, this book is, I've talked about being hope punk and solar punk, and I think that like it really is, and I believe in that. I believe in those ideas. I think the other counterpoint would be a very interesting Dark Sun as sort of like this conversation between a world that is really struggling and has next to no resources, and how that interplay, like if you ran a Dark Sun campaign that kind of got to this Radiant Citadel and back, that would be super fascinating for me. So from a stuff that I would love to see happen, I think it's interesting when like worlds have almost conversations with each other, or these campaigns flow thematically, right? In ways that are very thoughtful and smart and in fun ways. And so I'd love to see Dark Sun come to life. Much in the same way that I would love to see Sigil, because I think Sigil and Radiant Citadel could have some really great role play between those two weird cities.
Awesome. Well, there you go, folks. It's not just you out there clamoring into the void about Dark Sun or Planescape. The folks that are actually making books with the company are asking for the same things. Now, again, like I said, we talked about, will it live up to the expectation? Things will obviously have to change if that was to happen. We know that. But yeah, I think there's a lot. I mean, for those of you who were wondering or even saying, I don't think D&D 5e is losing steam anytime soon. I know we have some updates coming in the next couple years, but again, they're supposed to be backwards compatible. What does that mean? I don't know. But either way, this book right here will be available. I think you can obviously tell just from the past, which does not feel like 45 minutes. I should point out that we've been talking.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, really. It
Yeah.
feels like flown by.
Yeah, and I mean, you're passionate. The team was passionate, and at the very least, when folks aren't phoning it in and are really putting the passion into the products that they're putting out, it shows. You'll know. You could go and read, things that kind of seem like money shills from certain companies, and then see if you read something where people are actually passionate about it. You could just tell. So, and that's how, from what I've read, I feel about the Radiant Citadel. Like I said, I kind of flipped my script on it. I was kind of meh at the start because anthologies kind of,
Sure,
they don't
I
really
get
do
it.
it for me. But I don't know. I'm excited to see what people think about this.
Yeah.
Um, but Ajit, thank you so much for coming out here and spending some time with me, answering some questions, talking about D&D. It was a pleasure. So I will have all of your social medias and things linked down in the description, as well as links to pick up Radiant Citadel. Anything you want to say to the folks before we close it out?
You got a great community. I actually have friends that are part of your community, been longtime fans of
Oh,
yours, and
jeez.
they were super excited. And they actually messaged me. They're like, "Hey, Ted said you're going to be in this next show," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm excited too. It's really cool." So you got a great community. You got a great channel. I love your reviews, and I appreciate being on here. So thank you so much, Ted.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all next time.
Bye.